I'd also like to welcome you to this evening's session, which is focusing on global poverty reduction and the gender lens. My name is Suzanne Toten. I'm a member of the Theology and Religious Studies Department, and I'm also coordinator of the University Partnership for Catholic Relief Services. Just want to give a brief word on CRS, Catholic Relief. Catholic Relief Services is the official overseas humanitarian agency of the U.S. Catholic community. It alleviates suffering and provides assistance to about 100 million people in need in 100 countries without regard to race, religion, or nationality. This programming includes agriculture, education, emergency, health, and peace building. In May 2005, Villanova University entered into an institutional partnership with CRS, and we committed ourselves to collaborate on education, research, service, and advocacy for the purpose of building global solidarity with the world's poor and marginalized, in their efforts to secure the dignity and life that they deserve. I'd like to do some acknowledgements. The first is to acknowledge Barbara Wall, who's not here right now. Barbara is the Vice President for Mission and Ministry, and without her support, there would be no partnership. I'd also like to acknowledge Maureen McCullough. Maureen, are you here? Maureen is the Director of the Northeast Mid-Atlantic Regional Office. Arlene Flaherty, who is the Justice and Peace Liaison for the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic Office with Villanova University. I'd also like to acknowledge the terrific work that Margaret Kowalski has done. She was the interim coordinator of the partnership last fall, and she has also served on the planning team. So we began planning last fall. Also wanted to thank and acknowledge Lisa Soul, who is the co-director of Gender and Women's Studies, who is also a member of the planning team. And then finally, Lisa's here. Lisa is the MAC. She is our new administrative assistant, and she makes it a good work. Keeps us all on our toes. And finally, I want to acknowledge our co-sponsors. Those are the offices in the university that have done a phenomenal work promoting the colloquium. And they include Gender and Women's Studies, which has been phenomenal, the Center for Peace and Justice Education, Global Interdisciplinary Studies, the Hunter Studies Program, the Ethics Program, the Honors Program, and the following academic departments: Political Science, Sociology, Theology, and Religious Studies. I just want to remind those students who are coming in, whose faculty encourage them to come to the afternoon and evening event, please make sure you swipe your black card on your way in. It's the way we have of knowing that you're here and telling your professors that you'll be back to show them. Okay, so if you haven't swiped your card, please do it on the way out. Now I do want to introduce our presenters. Our presenter today, this evening, is Carrie Miller. Carrie is Catholic Relief Services Senior Technical Advisor for Health and HIV. She's responsible for providing strategic and technical assistance to Catholic Relief Services overseas offices. She became interested in gender issues in 2003 when she started working in the field of HIV, where a person's age and gender affects his or her HIV risk and vulnerability. Since that time, she's worked in collaboration with her colleagues to support gender-responsive programming across sectors, including health, HIV, agriculture, and microfinance, by supporting an agency-wide gender assessment, the development of strategic documents around gender, resource dissemination, and program evaluations examining the impact of CRS's work on adolescent girls, a population with much to contribute toward global poverty reduction. Ms. Miller started her career with CRS in 2000 in Madagascar and has worked in over a dozen countries. Her interest in international development began when she was an environmental Peace Corps volunteer based in rural Madagascar. She holds a master's degree in environmental management from Yale University School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, and a master's in public health from the Bloomberg School of Public Health, Johns Hopkins University. Francisca Viguad-Walsh, who spoke in the afternoon, is Catholic Relief Service, and Francisca is just going to give us a synopsis of the remarks from the afternoon. Francisca Viguad-Walsh is CRS's Technical Advisor for Sexual and Gender-Based Violence in Emergency Operations. She has a decade of experience in the protection sector, with specialization in sexual and gender-based violence. She launched her career with the International Rescue Committee, providing services to refugees and displaced communities, and continued on to Church Service and UNHCR, where she coordinated refugee status determinations and resettlement eligibility verification and processing for refugees throughout East, Central, and West Africa. In 2006, she joined CRS, where she has held several positions, including Emergency Programs Manager in VHH, and most recently, SGVV Program Manager for CS programs worldwide. She holds a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University of the Advanced International Studies, where she concentrated in conflict management and international human rights law. She has a bachelor's in international relations from American University. She also is a 2006 graduate of the Institute for International Mediation and Conflict Resolution in South Africa, and underwent training in the coordination of multi-sectoral response to gender and sexual-based violence in humanitarian settings at the University of Ghent in Belgium. Dr. Elizabeth Polsky, who is going to be responding, serves on the faculty of the History Department in the College of Arts and Liberal Arts and Sciences. Her teaching areas include South Asian history, the history of the British Empire, modern world history, colonial and post-colonial studies, and feminist theory. She is author of Colonial Justice in the British India, White Violence, and the Rule of Law, published by Cambridge University Press in 2010. She co-edited Fringes of Empire and has contributed to several anthologies. Her articles have appeared in Dawn, which is Pakistan's leading English language newspaper, the Journal of Asian Studies, Law and History Review, Gender and History, and Sagar, is that right? S-A-G-A-R? Is that how you say it? Sagar. Professor Polsky earned her doctorate in history from Columbia University, and she has a major presentation to do tomorrow, so we're very, very grateful that she was able to carve out some time with us to be with us tonight. So please join us for me in welcoming our guest, and I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thanks for that introduction, Sue. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here to share some of the work that Catholic Relief Services is doing to reduce poverty using a gender lens. In keeping with tonight's theme, I'm going to talk about what Cheryl Wu Dunn, business executive, author, and New York Times reporter, has called our century's greatest injustice, gender equality, and why addressing this injustice is mission critical for all actors in poverty reduction and sustainable development, but specifically for CRS. CRS strives not only to promote high quality programming and services to the people we serve, but also to promote human dignity, justice, and peace through our work by addressing unjust relationships, structures, and systems that are at the root of poverty, marginalization, and conflict. CRS's principles are rooted in Catholic social teaching, and this compels us to support right relationships among all people by ensuring that men and women have the opportunity, capacity, voice, and support they need to realize their full potential. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, good. And once we have ensured that everyone has access and is able to have their voice and support, we need to help them fully engage in family life, community life, and national life. And through this process, CRS helps them to realize their full potential. CRS's programming addresses the unique roles, relationships, and opportunities of men, women, boys, and girls in order to ensure that they meet their immediate needs and also position them to meet their long-term needs and achieve their full rights, responsibilities, and opportunities. Before I continue, I'd like to preface my remarks by saying that many of the examples that I'm going to share with you this evening will demonstrate injustices faced by women and girls. Yet, as all of you probably know, gender refers to the two sexes, both male and female, within the context of society. Gender roles can be affected by a variety of different issues, including ethnicity, class, age, race, and religion. And they may vary widely within and between cultures and often evolve and change over time. But unfortunately, due to long-standing cultural and religious traditions, laws, and dominant social norms, women and girls often do not have the same opportunities as men and boys. As a result, most of the work that we do at CRS seeks to address these long-standing injustices. But at the same time, it's important that we recognize that men and boys face their own challenges and are influenced by gender norms as well, some of which can be harmful to their own well-being, which need to be addressed and mitigated. Men and boys can also serve as important allies in supporting right relationships. I'd like to introduce you to Abushu Gudeta. He is one of our project beneficiaries who lives in Ethiopia, a country in East Africa. Any of you who have been lucky enough to travel, though, know it has an extensive history and it's extremely diverse, both geographically and culturally. But I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about his story. Gudeta has 2 wives and is the father of 16 children. 11 of these children are girls. Gudeta and his family are members of the Oromo ethnic group. When his daughter, Galego, was born, she was promised in marriage to an eligible bachelor, the son of a neighbor who was 6 or more years older than she was. In exchange for this promise, which was essentially a marriage contract, the neighbor's family will provide Gudeta with the money he needs to raise the girl. In essence, Galego's future in-laws are making a long-term investment in their property, their future daughter-in-law. When Galego is 13 years old or so, an age common for marriage in this part of Ethiopia, she will be pulled from school, if she was attending, be married, and move into her new husband's home. If her family has second thoughts and decide they no longer want her to be married, they must reimburse the neighbors their entire investment. Since most households in this part of Ethiopia earn their income through sustainable farming and subsistence farming, it's nearly impossible for most families to come up with this sum. So, if once Galego is married, she'll likely become pregnant soon, exposing herself and her unborn child to increased risks, including obstructed labor, obstetric fistula, and even death for mother or baby. Assuming her immature body survives childhood, she will be responsible for managing her household, where she will spend long hours caring for her child, fetching water, preparing food, and cooking in a smoke-filled room. She will be isolated from the support structures, including other girls her age, making it difficult for her to cope with her circumstances. Having only basic literacy and numeracy, her economic options are extremely limited. Plus, due to the amount of time she needs to spend engaged in domestic activities, she has little time for anything else. What little she may be able to earn from sale of surplus vegetables will be managed by her husband. And if her newborn happens to be a girl, chances are she will be contracted to be married and have the same fate as her mother, perpetuating a cycle of poverty, risk to her health, and inequality. From this story, I think that you'll agree that what happened to Galego is unjust. Simply because she's a girl from a poor family living in a rural area, she was deprived of an education, her future economic opportunities were reduced, and she was exposed to a pregnancy that put her life and the life of her child at risk. If her husband were to turn violent, she has nowhere to go. This is because she can't return home and shelters don't exist in this part of Ethiopia. In short, Galego's opportunities in life have been limited because she was a girl. This example illustrates the type of injustices CRS faces in much of our work. CRS's mission calls us to work towards establishment of right relationships and we must engage to address issues like this, simply because it's the right thing to do. Yet, there's also good evidence that this is a smart thing to do. The World Economic Forum and others suggest that there's a very compelling reason to address gender inequalities. Basically, smaller gender gaps are directly correlated with increased economic competitiveness. This year's World Bank World Development Report focused on gender equality in development and cites 3 reasons why addressing gender inequality is smart economics. The first of these reasons is enhanced productivity. By removing the barriers that prevent women and girls from accessing the same educational, economic, and productive inputs as men and boys, it can benefit the country as a whole. For example, in Burkina Faso, with no additional resources, only reallocating existing fertilizer and labor resources, total household agriculture production would increase by about 6%. The Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that equalizing access to productive resources between male and female farmers could increase agricultural output in developing countries by as much as 2.5% to 4%. And eliminating barriers that prevent women from working in certain occupations would have a positive effect and reduce the productivity gap between male and female workers by 1/3 to 1/2, increasing worker output from 3 to 25%, depending on the context. Secondly, by improving women's absolute and relative status, this contributes to many other outcomes, including positive outcomes for their children. Greater control over household resources by women leads to more investment in human capital with future benefits on the economy. Research has shown that an educated girl will invest 90% of her future income in her family, compared to 35% for a boy. In China, increasing female income by 10% of the average household income increases the fraction of surviving girls by 1 percentage point and increases the years of schooling for both boys and girls. In contrast, a comparable increase in male incomes reduces survival rates and educational attainment by girls and has no impact on boys. Finally, by leveling the playing field and giving both men and women equal chances to become socially and politically active, make decisions, and shape policies, it's possible to create a more representative and inclusive government and have more informed policy choices. This, in turn, will help to put countries on a stronger development path. Examples from Bangladesh show that women with greater control over healthcare and household purchases have higher nutritional status. Women's collective agency can transform not only their own individual agency, but also create benefits for society as a whole. Female suffrage in the United States led policymakers to turn their attention to child and maternal health and help lower infant mortality from 8 to 15%. In India, when women were given more positions at the local level, they were able to increase the provision of public goods, both female preferred goods such as water and sanitation, and male preferred goods such as irrigation and schools. And in the process, they also reduced corruption. In short, addressing gender equality enhances economic effectiveness and improves development outcomes, suggesting that poverty reduction and sustainable development goals are integrally linked to increased gender equality. So what I've hoped to show up until now is the fact that addressing gender inequality is central for CRS's mission, but it's also important for global economic development. What I'd like to do now is turn our attention back to Ethiopia and talk about a project that CRS engaged in where we worked with local partners, governments, communities, households, and adolescent girls themselves to reduce barriers and create an enabling environment that benefited not only the girls, but their community as a whole. Girls in Ethiopia face a number of structural and cultural barriers that prevent them from earning a living, having control over their quality of life, and reaching their full human potential. Limiting access to services like education and healthcare have a dramatic impact on their future economic potential. Cultural barriers about expectations of girls often limit their voice and influence in the community. So in response to these challenges, CRS implemented what we call the Ethiopian Adolescent Girls Empowerment Project. And this project was designed to empower girls in two watersheds in Ethiopia. This project was nested within a larger project that really sought to address livelihood issues for the whole population, but having this extra source of funding helped the project focus a little bit more on the specific needs of adolescent girls in order to foster systemic change and to offer systemic change. One of the things that was essential for this project was working with families to keep girls in school. Secondary school in particular is important for adolescent girls and can show the most gains in economic opportunity. It also benefits the health and well-being of our future children. A number of barriers that are faced by girls include the cost of education, balancing heavy workloads with studies, and so to address these, the project worked on a variety of different activities to address these barriers, such as introducing efficient cook stoves, which required less wood to cook the same amount of food, providing scholarships and stipends to reduce financial barriers, and co-locating water points near schools so the girls wouldn't have to travel as far to collect water. In addition to improving access to education, women and adolescent girls need access to productive resources. In Africa, nearly 50% of farmers are women. In Ethiopia, about 85% of the population relies on agriculture as their livelihood. Yet culturally, adolescent girls and women don't own land. They rarely receive support from agricultural extension services because they are not perceived to be real farmers, growing important or cash crops. To address these barriers, the project negotiated with communities to provide access to land for the adolescent girls. It provided low-cost irrigation to increase the types of crops that could be grown on the land and encouraged extension agents to work with the girls. This helped them increase their knowledge on pest and land management. Girls were also trained in basic business and marketing skills, which enabled them to join community farming groups or start their own groups in order to improve access to markets for their production. As a result of this, several of the girls were able to open bank accounts with the money they earned from the sale of their products. While access to productive assets is critical for addressing gender imbalances, adequate financing is an important part of starting and managing a business. Yet, once again, women and adolescent girls in particular are often excluded from formal financial services, particularly safe places to save and receive loans. For most rural adolescent girls, banks and microfinance institutions are simply out of reach. Poor infrastructure makes it difficult to travel there, and it's often unsafe. Even if she were able to physically access a bank or a microfinance institution, she owns no property to serve as collateral. And in many countries, if a girl or anyone is less than 18, it's impossible to get a loan due to existing laws. So, in order to improve access to financial services among rural and marginalized populations, CRS has developed a methodology that we call SILK. SILK stands for Savings and Internal Lending Communities, which are an informal, savings-led approach where groups of people come together to save and borrow money. Members self-select into these groups and establish their own constitutions that help them manage their resources more effectively. Through SILK, girls learned about group formation and management, how to develop operational procedures. They increased their financial literacy and management skills and learned how to store savings and manage and pay back a loan with interest. At the end of a cycle, which is usually 8 months to a year, group members share out the interest earned on their savings, providing a lump sum to the participants that they're able to invest in another purpose. Oftentimes, this may be used to pay school fees in many contexts. In addition to the financial benefits that SILK membership offers, it also creates leadership opportunities, since each SILK group has a president, a secretary, and a treasurer. These groups often become close-knit and can provide a supportive environment for their members to create social ties, something that's particularly important for adolescent girls who are out of school and are not able to regularly engage with their peers. Finally, one of the 3 key actions recommended by the 2012 World Development Report was the importance of increasing social and political engagement of all people, but especially women. To address the challenges faced by adolescent girls of limited agency and voice, CRS worked with the girls to set up safe spaces where they could share their experiences with others and receive mentoring support from successful women in their communities. In addition to providing this support, these groups had a protection function. If a girl was abducted, a common practice in the area, or a forced marriage was to occur, it could be reported and addressed with community leaders and the local government's Women's Affairs Office. As I mentioned earlier, it's not enough to work with the girls alone. It's also critical to work with their male peers, local institutions such as schools and parent-teacher associations, as well as community gatekeepers and leaders who enforce community norms. In the case of this project, we engaged both boys and girls in gender clubs, which increased dialogue between the genders and helped transform boys from being abusive to protective of girls' rights. For example, some of the boys decided to accompany the girls home on their walk from school, thereby protecting them from rape or abduction by others. Another example is working with community institutions to change cultural norms. In this case, the project worked with the local Abugeda, the traditional leaders of the Oromo people that have a great influence over community norms. Rather than prescribing a specific solution, the project used a technique called community conversations to help them identify and address traditional practices. More specifically, conversations are facilitated with leaders. They themselves determine which cultural practices are harmful and which practices are beneficial. Then they take action and create bylaws to prevent certain harmful practices. In this case, after going through the process, several local Abugedas worked in collaboration with the Women's Affairs Office to create laws to end marriage contracts. Many communities chose to exclude violators of this new law from local burial associations. This is a big deal in this particular context. While the project continued to see early marriage, project implementers did witness a decrease in new early marriage contracts, as well as an increase in cancellation of early marriages. So just to summarize some of the different types of benefits that we were able to find. This chart summarizes our baseline survey and our final survey around some key variables, such as enrollment in school, a decrease in labor performed by girls over time, and the ability to speak out in a community meeting. Still very small, but an important increase over what it was at the beginning of the project. what I want to emphasize is that this project and the successes that the project saw required working at multiple levels. It wasn't enough to work with the girls themselves, but it was necessary to engage boys, their households, communities, and even work towards changing unjust laws and policies. I'd now like to shift back to our friend here, Gudeta, and his daughter Gallego. When Gallego came of age, her suitor demanded that she be circumcised, also known as female genital cutting or mutilation, a cultural practice in preparation for marriage. Gallego notified the Women's Affairs Office, and both families were served with a notice to stop the marriage. At that point, Gudeta, Gallego's father, made the courageous decision. He decided to make a financial sacrifice and pay back the dowry for his daughter and allow her to continue her education. When his next daughter, Milku, came of age, he again decided to pay back the dowry and send her to school. Abushu has become a role model for his community. He is helping to break new ground and motivate other parents to make the brave choices and financial sacrifices that he made. The Ethiopian Adolescent Girls Empowerment Project is just one of many projects that uses a gender lens to identify and address the root causes of inequality and injustice. While this project happened to have an explicit focus on adolescent girls, a gender lens is still invaluable in many types of programming that CRS engages in. For example, in February, along with Francisca, who's stepped out, I visited one of our HIV clinics in Mombasa, Kenya, which CRS manages through its AIDS Relief Consortium. Through this clinic, HIV testing, counseling and testing, a gateway to care and treatment services, is provided at the clinic level, but also at the community level. And the clinic staff actively encourage the local population to get tested in order to know their status. In general, outside of antenatal care, rates of testing for both women and men are about equal. Yet, the project coordinator, Sister Veronica Wanjiru, was finding that while most women who were tested positive for HIV soon returned to the clinic and were enrolled in care and treatment, only a small proportion of the men with a positive diagnosis returned. This is a relatively common challenge. Men often delay care-seeking behavior due to cultural norms associated with masculinity, which have detrimental effects on their own health and well-being. So, in response to this challenge, Sister Veronica started a men's club for HIV-positive men. Members of this club were asked to bring a new member with them for every meeting. And gradually, over time, their enrollment of men in their care and treatment services has begun to increase with approximately the right amount of anticipated men. Other strategies used by AIDS Relief to increase male involvement include sending love letters to spouses. Women write these love letters to their spouses and in order to encourage them to attend antenatal care and be tested for HIV. And another site, in order to solicit male involvement, couples who come for antenatal care and prevention services are allowed to go to the front of the line, making their visit more efficient. As you can tell from both of these examples, CRS is making a positive contribution to addressing inequality and injustice linked to gender. Yet, what I'd like to say is that gender is complex and requires a multifaceted approach. There's no one silver bullet, and it takes a lot of time to develop locally appropriate responses to address this injustice and reduce poverty. Much of the work that CRS does is about creating choices or options for the poor. This means helping them to create an enabling environment that doesn't force parents to have to choose between sending a son or daughter to school. It doesn't force women to engage in transactional sex in order to afford the food that they need for their families, and it allows men to feel that there is no shame in getting the treatment they need to remain active and productive. Gender inequality is just one of many challenges that CRS and our partners face in our work. But by addressing this injustice is something we must do to be true to our mission. What I'd like to do now is stop for a minute and transition to a video. And I think maybe some of you in this room may have seen it before. It's a video created by the Girl Effect that really succinctly summarizes a lot of the key points that I was trying to make today. I think what's essential is, in closing, is that gender inequality is essential for economic development in the long term and as well as the short term. So let me just transition. Thank you for your attention.
Now we're here from
hi again, for some of you. I apologize for those that were here in the afternoon and can hear a bit of the same, but I'll try to synthesize. I can't watch that video anymore. I've watched it many times and it always makes me emotional. Especially because I believe it came out just around the time that a 9-year-old in Yemen went to a court and asked for a divorce. Her father had married her off to a 40-something-year-old, in exchange for, I don't recall how many goats, and she put her life at risk. Her father tried to return her to the gentleman that she was married to. And it was, I believe, don't quote me on this, but the first divorce that was granted to a child of her own doing. And she has since stated, I think she's about 12 now or 11, she's since stated that she wants to become a human rights lawyer, which I think is really cool. Anyhow, so just to show the importance of education. Carrie closed by saying that gender equality is really essential for economic development. I would take that and say it's incredibly important for economic development, as well as also to stem, curb, avoid, impede sexual and gender-based violence. It's the kind of work that Carrie and her team and other organizations are doing in development areas that can help elevate the status of not only women and girls, but boys as well. Working with masculinities. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman in order to avoid rape? So just quickly going through some of the things that we discussed this afternoon, I gave some examples on what sexual and gender-based violence is. You know, it's an acronym that's thrown around a lot now, especially in Washington, D.C., New York, and Geneva. People aren't always clear on what that means. Or some people think that it's just reduced to domestic violence or wife beating, if you will. But it's about female genital cutting or female genital mutilation, i.e., you know, if a woman is not circumcised and if she has any possibility of enjoying the act of sex, then she will not be faithful to her husband. It's about boys learning to be child soldiers or taken out of schools to act out their masculinities and fight in wars when that's actually both illegal in the international arena and in their domestic laws as well. It's about domestic violence as well. It's about, I threw in the term this afternoon, STGs, which is an acronym elementary school kids in West Africa came out with, sexually transmitted grades, because it's such a phenomenon of kids having to secure A's and B's by giving their teachers sex. It's also about sexual abuse at the hands of humanitarian aid workers. And then finally, rape. I focused on rape in two settings that CRS works in, Haiti and the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. I chose those two places because, contrary to Carrie, I work specifically or exclusively in emergency operations and humanitarian aid, and that's the most egregious form of SGPV, of sexual violence that we see in the field. And I contrasted the two, that in one case, it's a man-made crisis, the conflict in Congo, and in another case, it was a natural disaster, the earthquake in Haiti, that was, let's say, a shock to the system. And what we saw after that shock was very high levels of rape and high levels of sexual exploitation and abuse. I differentiate that rape and sexual exploitation and abuse because one is, well, rape, it's clear what it is, but sexual exploitation and abuse is usually perpetrated by people in positions of authority that have different power levels and actually can exercise power over any given person. That is to say, me as an aid worker that has goods, food, shelter, materials, anything in my hands, I have a particular piece of power and I can exercise that over somebody and force somebody to give me sex in exchange. And do I still have a couple of minutes? Sure. I just gave some examples of what we do in DRC and Haiti to try and avoid or respond to that problem. In DRC, for example, we work with traditional leaders to help them understand what is legal and what is not legal in their contexts, in terms of, for example, early child marriage, or when a woman is raped and she's cast outside her home or her society, what can a traditional religious leader do to try and create harmony in the household and have this woman that was, at the end of the day, nothing other than a victim accepted back into the home. And also address trauma for men, as men undergo significant trauma as their families undergo this kind of violence. I discussed how CRS has helped have doctors that are specialized in fistula repair surgery, which is vaginal and anal tearing as a result of extremely violent rape. How they've been trained to go out into the most remote areas of Congo where this kind of rape is happening so that they can provide medical services to women that suffer from fistula as a result of rape. And also about early warning systems, communities contacting each other and letting each other know, or individuals letting each other know when there's a problem, when there's a militia arriving at a certain village or whatnot. And then in Haiti, also talked about how, as a result of the earthquake, there was a mass movement of people, which wasn't seen too much in the news, towards the east, towards the Dominican Republic, people looking to get out of their situation, move away from the trauma that they experienced in the capital, in Port-au-Prince, looking for better economic opportunities, and have thus fell victim to traffickers. Traffickers of people were already active on the Dominican-Haitian border, but they descended like scavengers after the earthquake because they knew that there was an opportunity for them. And unfortunately, we saw many cases of children that were taken either for to be killed for organ removal. Shortly after the earthquake, about 16 children showed up in Argentina, 16 Haitian kids. Nobody knows how they got there. And they were destined for sexual trade in Peru. So we worked with police and other NGOs and border authorities to set up posts along the bridge between Haiti and Dominican Republic and literally try to stop every individual crossing with a child and verify by separate interviews whether that child was genuinely the son or daughter of the individual crossing. And if they weren't, call upon the police to separate them. And also we set up a safe house for rape survivors and for these children that we were able to intercept. I think, yeah, we, and just to say, to finalize, from the discussion that came out afterwards, it was quite interesting. I noticed, I think, two important things that the question, one question was, well, at what point or how do you empower women so that they don't succumb to these kinds of things and to exploitation? Or how does one empower women so that they can be an equal partner in their home? The problem with emergency work when there is a crisis such as an earthquake or a flood or a conflict, a war, it's a little bit too late. There are already prior gender roles that are embedded in societies. So at that point in time, trying to remove a woman from a household that is suffering severe domestic violence or who is not educated enough to be able to participate to the economic workforce in where she lives, it's a little bit more difficult after the trauma. And that's why I just want to reinforce that the work that Carrie's team does prior to any event such as a war or an earthquake is really critical, because it's also working with men so that they understand, or rather so that they are in agreement and reap from the benefits of equality, gender equality between women and men, so that both can contribute to the household and both can help to preserve the household after the impact of any disaster, be it war, be it man-made or natural. Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you to Sue for inviting me to this event and giving me the opportunity to listen and respond to these very touching presentations. I'm going to respond largely to Carrie's talk because I wasn't here earlier. I was teaching during the afternoon. And you know, from my perspective, what we heard today evokes for me questions about the local and the global. because I think what Carrie is talking about is a global problem that CRS is addressing in local contexts. And the portrait that emerged was of women in predominantly rural and agricultural societies cut off from basic rights, right to own property, right to borrow money, and even perhaps the right to information and access to the wider world. And I want to try to talk a little bit about the global, how that local links to the global. So I think there's two ways that we could understand this problem of rural poverty and the challenges that women face. The one, as a historian of the British Empire, would be in the history of colonialism. Why are these societies in Africa so poor to begin with? And the other would be the question of development and globalization as it emerged in the 20th century. Because on the one hand, we have these local contexts of poverty, and on the other hand, we live in an increasingly globalized world where economies, societies, and cultures are integrated. And so one of the things I was thinking about when I was listening to this talk is the research on globalization and its impact on women. So on the one hand, we heard today about women kind of isolated in rural societies without access to basic rights. And on the other hand, when people look at the impact of globalization on women, they talk about that as the world becomes more globalized and as free market forces are set out on the world, there's a race to the bottom, wages decline, and the race to the bottom leads, of course, to women. When companies go to places like the Philippines and Thailand and India, frequently women are given employees increased employment opportunities, but that's for the very reason that they're the lowest paid workers in those societies. So we know, globally speaking, women do 2/3 of the world's work. They receive 10% of the world's income, and they own 1% of the means of production. And sadly, I think the assumption that development will lead to the alleviation of poverty and will reduce pressures on women has not been borne out by reality. In fact, it's possible to see that development actually increases pressures on women in certain societies. So I'm just wondering, when we think about connecting the local and the global, when poor rural women are liberated into a more connected world, on what basis are they going to be incorporated into that more connected world? On what basis are they going to be incorporated into a globalized society? So those are really the comments that I had. I know that's not the exact nature of your talk, but I just thought it would be interesting to put these two pieces together.
Thanks.
I think that they're, yeah.
We're going to open it up to you for any questions or comments you might have or insights. Please feel free. We've got a microphone right up in the center. Any questions you'd like to ask? Is that football?
I was wondering, since you guys have been all around the world,
Women.
Lovely women have been all around the world. Which countries are the worst, and why? And which ones do we need to attack first? Would you say? Like if we were to go at one country, we can make an example of it, and then all the other will follow. You know what I mean? Like if we attack one certain continent, and then if it worked there and everyone saw it, which one would you go after first? From the goal of CRM.
Yes. Yeah. I'm trying to. There's a report. I had it in my earlier presentation that actually measures sort of gender differences across countries, and it's a composite index, and it very much varies depending on which component of gender you're looking at. So are you looking at boys and girls education? Are you looking at economic access? And that might be one particular way of trying to select a country, specifically from a gender perspective, is look at some of these global indices. But the thing that I've found working in gender, this is just 2 examples, and I've also done a lot of talking with adolescent girls in Rwanda and in Zimbabwe. And while there are some certain traits and certain commonalities, getting girls support that they need from other girls, having them have access to financial resources in a lot of cases has been very helpful. The cultural context in so many different places is very different. So when you're addressing gender, it has to be a very localized solution. So to say that there's going to be a one-size-fits-all, for me, there's certain principles that would probably apply across multiple countries, but it would be very difficult to say if it worked in Zimbabwe, it's definitely going to work in India. Things are just so different that I don't know if that's entirely possible.
So you're with the Catholic Relief Services. I'm wondering, what is the religious implications when you are working with these women, especially in these communities where Christianity might not be the religion? Like, what have you kind of tied both of them together?
Well, I think one thing that's important to understand about CRS is we're the development arm of the USCCB, and we don't engage in any sort of proselytization or anything like that. So Catholic social teaching informs the work that we do, but I think that for me, I don't happen to be Catholic, and for me, I kind of interpret that as just being a nice and conscious citizen of the world, is kind of how, if I had to summarize that in a nutshell. So I don't think that the Catholic component, especially working in a non-Christian context, is something that we really put into our particular programs. I would say in some cases there's somewhat of an exception. We have a curriculum that we've worked on called The Faithful House that was designed to reduce HIV transmission by encouraging stronger relationships between men and women. And that is very much based on a Christian approach, but at the same time, a lot of the populations where we're working in Africa happen to be Christians, so it fits what they're working on. That same curriculum wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for a Muslim audience, so it would have to be adapted for that. I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
Yeah, from my perspective, largely little impact. I mean, you have to take into consideration that, number one, we actually have, I think, more non-Catholic staff working for CRS than Catholic staff. And that is because we don't, I mean, you're looking at 2 Americans right now, but this is rare. Or, it's not rare, but most of our staff is actually national staff, educated staff in country. And just, a lot of them, they inform the programs. They're the ones that tell us, or they themselves write proposals and tell us, this is a strategy that we need in X, Y, Z country. An example that comes to mind right now is in the Afghan refugee camps in Pakistan. That's entirely staffed by Pakistani human rights lawyers. And they worked with Afghan mullahs in the camps to develop messaging on violence against women that they incorporate into their Friday prayers or Friday sermons. So there isn't a drop of Catholicism there. But at the end of the day, and I mean, I think the basis, the message of peace and harmony in the family, that cuts across all religions. So.
Hi, first I'd just like to say thank you for your comments. They're extremely informative. But I would assume that when you enter a country to work on fixing gender relations, that most of the men, and I would assume also some of the women, aren't exactly receptive to your ideals. How do you deal with that when you're entering a country or community, and how do you warm them up to your ideas and get them to really listen to you?
Yeah. I think there's sort of 2 components to that. I think that one is making sure that it's not our ideas. I mean, I think that's what the idea of the community conversation is really working with communities to do the analysis themselves and figure out what's working for them and what is potentially harmful for them. So that's the first thing. At the same time, you're right, as Francisca said, it's a lot about staff attitudes, and in order to have a project like this, you need staff who understand what the issues are. And one of the benefits of working with the staff that we have is they're familiar with the local context. But that's also somewhat a drawback, is that's always the way things have been. Why would you want to change it? So helping them to recognize what some of the challenges are is a bit of a challenge. And one of the person who was the program manager for the Ethiopian project found that that's what really took the longest amount of time, was working with the staff so that they understood all of the concepts and what they were really trying to achieve. And it's not easy, and that's why, you know, it's a process and you have to keep working on it. So, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything else to add. Yeah.
About the Gates Foundation, USAID, Gates Foundation, the World Bank are earmarking grants for gender. Yes. So my question is, are they the ones who are driving this, or was it in the air long before this, and they just got on the bandwagon? And the other question is, at what point did CRS, acknowledge the fact that that gender had to be an integral part of its programming, gender equality? How did that happen, or what didn't happen, or was that a process?
I think actually, I started with CRS in 2000, and I know at least by 1999, we had a gender responsive programming statement. And in our initial program guidance, there was guidance on how to conduct a gender analysis. So it's something that has been recognized by CRS as important. It's also been a donor requirement, and there's always a section on that. At the same time, when we've been responding to those types of proposals, when any donor evaluates a proposal, there's usually sort of a percentage ranking that they're scoring you on. Usually in the past, gender has had a much lower percentage in their thing. So CRS would devote a lot of time to other sections and less time to that. I think with the advent of Hillary Clinton, especially in the State Department, who has had a strong influence on the Global Health Initiative and USAID, they're making the gender and empowerment for women and girls much more front and center. So I think that having that has actually been helpful in pushing CRS forward on where it needs to go in order to fill its mission. But that's very much a personal perspective. And it's a balancing act.
I would only add to that is that something huge is in the making in the United States right now. Huge. It's called the National Action Plan. It's by executive order of Obama. And this is a plan that is informed, let me see if I can articulate this correctly, UN Security Council Resolution 1325 from the year 2000 required that women be involved in peace negotiations. We had seen conflict and peace constantly happening, and it was always a boys' club deciding, well, what needs to happen? How do we achieve peace? And women were never included in discussions when women are by far one of the most impacted, if not the most impacted group. So anyhow, that was in the year 2000, and every country was supposed to develop their own plan about how they would ensure that women were involved in peace processes. And Obama took it to heart about a year ago, I want to say, and the government, the United States government, in December 2011, released its plan on how it will include gender and gender-based violence in all its aid work, development and humanitarian aid programming across the world, how it's going to bring it front and center. Right now, every agency within the United States Department of State, within USAID, and even CDC, and other arms, so to speak, are developing plans, sub-plans. And that's pretty big. It'll be out supposedly in June.
Where did the initiative for that come?
Hillary Clinton. Yeah.
Amazing.
Hillary Clinton and Milan Revere, which is the Global Ambassador for Women's Affairs. That's a first-time position that we have in the U.S. in the State Department. Yeah.
Good evening. Thank you so much. I was just wondering, most of us are students, I think a lot of us undergrads, and so what, assuming that we have practically no money, can we do as students to support some of these initiatives and put action to the things that you have all brought to our attention this evening?
I would start by suggesting that gender violence and gender inequality is not a problem out there, it's a problem right here. And you could begin right here on campus by becoming more involved in events related to Take Back the Night, in events related to gender and women's studies, increasing your own awareness about the local problem as a first step towards thinking about how you might sensitively forge bonds of solidarity with women around the world. But I think it's important not to think, bringing your point out, that out there they got a real mess, but here the gender situation is neat and clean. And I think it's important for us to, while acknowledging the crisis in which women find themselves in places like the Congo, the crisis women found themselves in New Orleans, that women in this country find themselves also subject to a lot of the same issues that are plaguing women in villages in Ethiopia.
Yep, no, and that's very true. And I also, the other thing that that brings up for me is I have a colleague who works very much on international gender-based violence issues, but one of the things that she felt was important was getting experience and in this field. And one of the things that she did was volunteer at a women's shelter on their crisis line. So she would go a couple times a month. I think they had a brief training program for her, and then she would answer calls and then make sure that the calls got to the right people. So it's a way of addressing a very real problem, getting some of your skills, and because a lot of our systems are quite interesting the way that they're managed here. And I think at least what I'm seeing quite a bit of in development proposals is a real interest in system strengthening. And some of the ways that our systems are linked from the centers and the way people, how they're linked to hospitals and the whole forensic side of things is much more developed here than it is in developing countries. So by working in that system, you'd not only be able to contribute to addressing problems that people have here, but also gaining valuable experience if this is something, an area you'd want to transition to working in internationally. So.
I fully agree with him, and I definitely started by saying we need to figure out what's happening here. We have to be an example. But I do want to say, if anybody doubts, which I did to a degree, if anybody doubts that an 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old American does not have the capacity to influence U.S. policy overseas, all you have to do is watch the effects of the Kony 2012 video, which, by the way, which is a separate topic, I'm not even a great fan of the video in itself. But wow, everything that has happened since, and the fact that the African Union has already made certain declarations on this, and they've deployed people to try and negotiate, or I don't remember the details, but this just happened last week, to Congo and Central African Republic, where Kony supposedly is. That's amazing, because you need to take into account that actually Kony is not that much of a big deal today. He was a big deal before, and this has been going on for over 20 years, and people were screaming bloody murder about it for 20 years. The only difference is that youth was not involved. It was the international aid organizations that were talking on Capitol Hill about it, or in Geneva in New York, not youth. And this is the first time that youth is involved, and boom, we saw huge changes in a matter of 10, 14 days.
Hello, thank you for speaking. My question is, listening to some of the services that CRS provides, specifically related to sexually based violence, a lot of them are after the effect, like the shelters for women or the fistula surgeries. And I know you touched briefly on how boys might want girls home from school to prevent rape, but are there any other preventative programs going on to, I guess, kind of alter this culture where rape is kind of brushed under the rug? And, you know, is there anything that we can do, like you were saying, in the U.S. also, because we also have a rape culture?
Rape specifically, I know a lot of our programs are more about establishing discussion. And then there's an organization that works on a lot of campuses, like Men Can Stop Rapers, which is pretty interesting.
But some things that CRS does specific around prevention, I mean, try to tackle it from different ways. One could just be general sensitization, right? Another thing is practical things that people don't necessarily think of. And by the way, we won't think of. This is going back to Carrie's point about that the ideas come from the community. It's something so simple, but it's just about CRS or another organization facilitating the dialogue. Because leaders of a particular village won't necessarily think of rape as an issue because it doesn't directly affect them. At least they're not aware that it's affecting them and their families, because their wives are not going to inform them because they don't want to be thrown out of the house. So just facilitating discussions, and some things that come to mind right now, through one early warning system project in Congo, together talking about this, they decided to cut the grass regularly. So, okay, if we cut the grass, we can see if there are any rebel group, individuals, soldiers, militia members out there where we're going to go collect our firewood. If the grass is short enough, we can see if there are people out there. Those were just small things that hadn't been thought of, but can have a real impact. Other ways, a lot of economic empowerment, and for example, a project that we have in Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua, we kind of tempt, so to speak, boys to try to leave gangs by providing them with training. On-the-job training with different IT companies or with things such as carpentry skills, anything, to try and tempt them out of gangs. And that is in itself a preventive measure, because one of the initiation rites in a gang is to rape girls in the school, your classmates. And also just the pressures that they are under in being in a gang themselves, that is technically gender-based violence as well. The fact that they have to be a strong man and do all these nefarious acts. And we've had some success with that.
Yeah. And there's also a lot of the life skills education that gets incorporated into HIV prevention projects, usually has a component on gender and dialoguing and helping people understand that that's not an okay type of thing to do. The other thing I mentioned with the particular putting the water points near schools, one reason for doing that was to reduce labor, but the other one is that's a more public place, so because a lot of times girls would be abducted when they were going to get water. So that was another sort of related to the grass issues. There's structural types of issues that can be done. Other programs have worked on doing community analyses for mapping out places of where it's potentially dangerous for girls to be, and helping to negotiate rules with bar owners, that it's not okay to hire a girl under 18 to work in your bar, even though that's going to attract more business. So there's a lot of different types of things.
Well, unfortunately, I have to bring this to a close. Nicholas Kristof and Cheryl Verdun, and they're both Cat the Sky, talk about gender-based violence. What they call gendercide is the paramount moral issue. And they call upon all of us to become part of a global movement to combat this. They see this as every bit as significant as the abolitionist movement. I want to thank Carrie Miller and Francisca Viguad-Walsh and Elizabeth Polsky for being with us today, sharing their insights, sharing their experience. I mean, you really helped to educate the we've helped educate the Villanova community beyond the classroom. And I'm very grateful for that, for bringing your experience to bear, your insights to bear, your knowledge to bear. You added a dimension that, is wonderful to have. So thank you so much for, I know it's taken you away from your work, but I do want to thank you for the time that you've invested in preparing and for being with us. And Elizabeth, I know we're taking you away from the job that you have to do tomorrow. So please join with me in thanking our presenters.